They shoved the ugliest alien woman forward like a sentence, a living insult wrapped in ceremonial chains. The court expected the human to flinch, to beg for anyone else. Instead, he stepped down from the dais, smiled like he'd been waiting, and said, "Finally, you brought her to me." The first thing Elias Wren noticed wasn't her face, it was her posture. Even hunched under the weight of a ceremonial mantle, even with a chain looped around her wrists like a ribbon of shame, she stood with the rigid stillness of someone refusing to be reduced. The crowd filled the hall of accord, thousands of alien nobles arranged in tiers like a living amphitheater, yet the woman at the center felt like the only solid thing in the room. The Chancellor of Vera, a tall official whose skin shimmered like polished basalt, raised a long finger toward her. "Hold," he declared, voice amplified by the hall's acoustic veins, "our offering, a bridge between our people and the humans, a marriage to end hostilities." The word offering landed like an insult. Elias saw it in her eyes, those eyes the Varens called wrong, too pale, too large, too open. An eye shape that didn't narrow properly in bright light, that didn't hide what it felt. An eye shape that made it easy for others to call her weak. She didn't blink. The Chancellor let the silence stretch, savoring it. "She is of low desirability, a burden on our houses, yet we are generous, we gift her to you." A few nobles clicked their tongues in amusement. Some flicked their frills in a gesture Elias had learned meant pity with teeth. The translator bead at Elias' collar rendered the Varen phrasing into clean human words, but it couldn't scrub the venom underneath. Elias kept his hands loosely clasped behind his back. At his side, Commander Vance stood stiff as a spear, jaw tight. Human diplomats watched from their section, faces carefully neutral. This was a performance meant to bend him. They expected the human to feel shame, to be offended, to demand a better match, someone beautiful, someone valuable, someone who could be paraded like proof of alliance. They expected him to take the insult personally, not to notice the person inside it. The alien woman lifted her chin a fraction. Elias recognized the movement like a familiar chord. He had seen that exact stubborn lift in a dim corridor on a ruined station, months ago, when she'd been kneeling beside a busted conduit with burnt hands and a half-dead rescue beacon. Back then, she hadn't been dressed in ceremonial cloth. She'd been covered in soot and blood that wasn't hers, hair frizzed from electrical discharge, teeth clenched as she rewired a power grid using scraps. Back then, no one had been watching, except him. The Chancellor's voice rose again. "Elias Wren of Earth. Will you accept the bond? Will you accept Sealan of No House?" No house, that was new. Elias felt it like a snap of ice underfoot. They had stripped even her lineage from her for this moment, turning her into a disposable thing, someone to be given away without consequence. Sealan's gaze flicked to the human delegation, then back to the Chancellor. Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders drew inward a hair, just enough for Elias to sense the blow had landed. He moved before Commander Vance could grip his sleeve, before protocol could lock him in place. Elias descended the dais steps and walked into the open circle at the center of the hall. The crowd's murmurs softened into a hush, so complete it felt like pressure against the skin. Sealan watched him approach with a steady stare that made the air feel sharp. Her face, by Varen standards, was wrong in a dozen ways. Asymmetrical cheek plates, a ridge that curved when it should have been straight, scars tracing patterns across her jaw and throat like lightning. But Elias had learned long ago that symmetry was a preference, not a truth, and scars were history made visible. He stopped in front of her, close enough to see the fine tremor in her wrists where the chain cut into skin, close enough to see that her breathing was controlled, measured. Not for fragility, for survival. Elias smiled, not a diplomat's smile, not a weapon, a real one. "Finally," he said, voice carrying in the quiet hall, "you brought her to me." The Chancellor's frills stiffened. "You accept." Elias didn't answer the Chancellor at first. He looked at Sealan instead, as if the entire court had faded into smoke. "Sealan," he said softly, the way he'd said it months ago in the wreckage. "Do you remember me?" For the first time, her control cracked, not much. A blink. A tiny widening of those two open eyes, the barest tightening at the corners of her mouth. But Elias saw it, so did the court. A ripple passed through the tiers of nobles like wind through reeds. Sealan's voice came out low, edged with disbelief. "Human, you survived." Elias laughed under his breath. "You're the one who made sure I did." He reached toward her wrists, slow enough to be permission rather than assumption. The chain was ceremonial, not a true restraint, meant for symbolism, but its message was clear: you are property. Elias wrapped his fingers around the clasp. The Chancellor snapped, "You may not." Elias looked up. "Watch me." His thumb pressed the release. The chain fell away with a metallic whisper pooling at Seelan's feet like a shed skin. A collective gasp echoed. Elias offered his hand, palm up, simple. Seelan stared at it as if it were a riddle, then carefully, so carefully, she placed her hand in his. Her skin was warmer than he expected, textured like fine stone. Her grip was firm, calloused, the hand of a builder, not a princess. Elias turned to face the hall, still holding her hand. I accept the bond, he said clearly. Not your gift, not your insult, I accept her. The Chancellor's voice sharpened. She is undesirable, you do not understand what you take. Elias' smile vanished. Oh, he said, calm as a locked door. I understand perfectly. They gave Elias and Seelan a suite in the embassy wing, rooms designed to impress humans with sweeping windows and curated art. The walls were too clean, the air too perfumed. Everything about it screamed control. The moment the doors sealed, Seelan let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like a lifetime. She didn't sag, she didn't collapse. She simply stood still and closed her eyes for 2 seconds, as if letting her body remember it was allowed to exist without an audience. Elias stayed quiet. He had learned on the frontier that silence could be respect. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at him like he might be another trap. You embarrassed them, she said. They embarrassed themselves, Elias replied. A corner of her mouth twitched. It didn't become a smile, more like the memory of one. Why? Elias leaned against the table, arms folded, careful not to crowd her. Because I know what they're doing, and because I know you. Seelan's gaze narrowed. You saw me once, in ruins. Twice, Elias said. I saw you again at the relief docks on Caro's station. You were carrying medical crates that should have taken 2 people. You were arguing with a Varen officer about evac priority lists. Her throat bobbed. You noticed. I notice competence, Elias said. It's kind of my job. Seelan's shoulders shifted as if she didn't know what to do with praise that wasn't sharpened into mockery. She paced a small circle, restless, then stopped by the window. Outside, the Varen capital stretched like a living sculpture, towers grown rather than built, surfaces shimmering with bioluminescent veins. Beautiful in a way humans tended to romanticize. Seelan watched it without awe. They call me ugly, she said quietly. Elias didn't answer immediately. He chose honesty over comfort. They call you ugly because they needed a word that would make you small. Seelan's jaw tightened. I was born with the wrong plates, the wrong ridges. My mother said I'd grow into them. I did not. Elias stepped closer, not too close. Your scars, her fingers rose to her throat unconsciously. Repair accident, reactor flare, I kept working, the station needed heat. Elias swallowed. He remembered the burned conduit, the flicker of failing lights, the way Seelan had shoved him behind a bulkhead when the panel blew. You saved people, he said. Seelan's voice came out flat. I saved function, people were attached. There it was again, how she made herself smaller even while describing something heroic. Elias shook his head. That's not how humans talk about it. She turned, curious despite herself. How do humans talk about it? Elias considered. We'd say you did the right thing even when it hurt. Seelan stared at him for a long moment as if testing whether the words were real. Then she asked, almost defensively, why would you bind yourself to me? They meant to punish you. Elias' eyes softened. I know. Seelan's expression sharpened. And you accepted anyway. Elias nodded. Yes, because you pity me. The question was a blade. She held it out carefully, expecting him to cut himself on it. Elias didn't flinch. No, Seelan's eyes searched his face like someone who had been lied to often enough to become an expert. Elias spoke simply, because I've been where you are, not with looks, with labels. He tapped the embassy insignia on his sleeve. They call me a negotiator, a pacifier. Soft human. Seelan tilted her head. Elias smiled wryly. Back on Earth, the people who sent me here wanted me to be a symbol. They wanted me to smile and swallow insults so they could say we kept peace. Seelan's gaze sharpened. But you are not soft. Elias' smile thinned. No, I'm just controlled. Seelan exhaled slowly as if something inside her loosened. Then in a voice so small it almost vanished, she said, I thought I would die in that hall. Elias stepped closer, finally within arm's reach. Not while I'm here. Seelan looked down at their joined hands, still linked, neither of them having let go. Human, she murmured, you are strange. Elias laughed. I get that a lot. The next days were a parade of politeness wrapped around pressure. Varen officials arrived with gifts, fabrics, titles, invitations to salons. The Chancellor himself sent a messenger with a scroll declaring that Seelan would be granted a minor household if she behaved properly as a bonded spouse. Seelan read the scroll once, expression unreadable, then handed it back to Elias. What do you want to do? Elias asked. Seelan's eyes flashed. Burn it. Elias nodded. Fair. He placed it in the recycler slot. The machine hummed and reduced the Chancellor's generosity to dust. Seelan watched the process with something like satisfaction, but satisfaction didn't solve the real problem. On the fourth day, Commander Vance cornered Elias in the embassy corridor. You're making enemies, Vance hissed. The Varens are furious. Your little stunt with the chain was necessary, Elias said calmly. Vance's eyes cut toward the suite door. You don't know what she is. Elias' voice went colder. I know she's a person. Vance's jaw clenched. Rumor says she was exiled for sabotage, for breaking growth towers, for killing. Elias stepped forward until Vance fell silent. Rumors, Elias said, in a court that weaponizes shame, try harder, Vance scoffed. You think you're saving her. You think this is romance. Elias didn't rise to the bait. I think the alliance needs honesty more than theater. And you think she's honest? Elias' gaze didn't waver. I know she is. Vance stared at him a moment, then stormed off. Elias returned to the suite. Seelan was at the table, dissecting a Varen data slate with a set of tiny tools she'd improvised from hair pins and a broken stylus. Her hands moved with clean precision like a surgeon. What are you doing? Elias asked. Seelan didn't look up. Listening. To what? She flicked a component into place and the slate lit, its secure casing bypassed. A stream of encrypted transmissions scrolled across the screen. Elias' eyebrows rose. That's illegal. Seelan finally looked at him. So was the reactor flare. Illegality does not always correlate with wrongness. Elias huffed a laugh. Touché. Seelan tapped the screen. They are planning something. Elias leaned in. The translator bead struggled with the dense political language, but the pattern was clear enough. Talk of restoring face, correcting humiliation, removing human influence. And then a phrase that made Elias' blood chill, public dissolution of bond under dishonor clause. They can do that? Elias asked. Seelan's expression tightened. If they declare me unfit, if they claim I deceived you, if they claim you were coerced. Elias' jaw set, and then, Seelan's voice went flat. Then they return me to no house, which means containment, work camps, disappearance. Elias stared at the screen, anger hot and clean, all because they didn't like being embarrassed. Seelan's eyes flicked up. Not all. Elias met her gaze. What else? Seelan hesitated, then she said, because I know something. Elias' heart thudded. What do you know? Seelan's fingers tightened around the stylus. They're towers, the growth towers that make this city. They are failing. Elias blinked. Failing. Seelan nodded once. They are living structures, they need balance. The nobles demand faster expansion, taller spires, brighter veins. They starve the roots to feed the crown. Elias' mind spun. If the city's infrastructure was alive and failing, that was catastrophic. Seelan continued, voice clipped as if forcing herself through something painful. I warned them. I was an engineer in the Tower Guild. I showed them the stress fractures. I showed them the nutrient collapse. Elias' stomach tightened. And they ignored you. They laughed, Seelan said. They said my eyes were too open and made me see problems where none existed. They said my plates were malformed and so my conclusions must be malformed too. Elias felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Seelan's gaze dropped. When the first tower cracked, they needed someone to blame, someone already labeled undesirable. Elias' voice was quiet. So they exiled you, Seelan's mouth twisted. Worse, they renamed me. No house. Elias exhaled slowly. They're planning to dissolve our bond so they can silence you. Seelan nodded. Elias straightened, eyes hard. Then we don't let them. Seelan's gaze flicked to his face, searching for uncertainty. She found none. That was when something in her expression changed subtly, like a locked door shifting open a millimeter. Human, she said, voice low. Why are you doing this? Elias answered without hesitation. Because you're right, he said. Because you saved my life when it would have been easier to walk away. Seelan's throat bobbed. That was function. Elias shook his head. That was mercy. Seelan stared at him as if the word was foreign. Maybe it was. Elias reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Whatever they call you, he said, whatever they try to make you, I'm not letting them erase you. For a moment, Seelan's hand trembled under his, then her fingers curled slowly, deliberately around his. The attempt came at dawn. The embassy alarms didn't blare. The doors didn't explode. No dramatic soldiers stormed in. It was cleaner than that. A legal notice arrived, dissolution hearings scheduled in the Hall of Accord within the hour. Attendance mandatory, refusal would be interpreted as admission of coercion. They're fast, Elias muttered, reading it. Seelan was already dressed, not in the ceremonial mantle they'd forced on her before, but in simple engineer's garb with reinforced seams. She had braided her hair tight away from her face. Her scars were visible, unapologetic. Elias watched her and felt a fierce, quiet pride. "Ready?" he asked. Seelan nodded once. Yes. They entered the Hall of Accord together. This time Seelan was not chained. This time Elias did not walk behind anyone. Whispers rose as they approached the center circle. Nobles leaned forward hungry. The Chancellor sat high, frills flared wide like a threat display. The Chancellor's voice boomed. Elias Wren of Earth. You have been deceived. The bonded female Seelan has concealed her unfitness and her crimes. By our law, the bond may be dissolved under dishonor clause. Elias raised a hand. I'd like to speak. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. Granted, briefly. Elias turned, scanning the hall. Human diplomats watched tense. Varen nobles watched smug. Cameras hovered like insects. Elias took a breath. Then he did something the Varens were not prepared for. He told the truth without ornament. I was on Caro's station during the reactor cascade, Elias said. I would be dead if Seelan hadn't rerouted power and dragged my injured team to a sealed corridor. Murmurs, the Chancellor's frills twitched. Anecdote, Elias kept going. I have records, station logs, emergency beacons. I have human witnesses. He gestured behind him. Commander Vance, standing in the human section, stiffened and then after a beat stepped forward. His face was pale, but he nodded once. Elias continued. Seelan has also provided evidence that the growth towers are failing due to nutrient misallocation and accelerated crown expansion. Now the murmurs turned sharp, uneasy. The Chancellor hissed, lies from a malformed mind. Seelan's voice cut through the hall, steady, clear. Then test it, she said. Silence. Seelan lifted a small device from her belt, an improvised scanner, rough and honest. Scan the nearest tower route. Check nutrient flow ratios. Check stress fractures along the lower lattice. The Chancellor's eyes flashed. You presume to? Elias stepped forward. If she's lying, it will show. If she's telling the truth, it will also show. The hall held its breath. Varen nobles hated public uncertainty. They hated being forced into choices with witnesses, but they loved spectacle. The Chancellor's pride battled his fear, and pride won. He snapped his fingers. Guards brought out an official scanner, sleek and gilded. A technician activated it, the beam projecting a diagnostic image into the air. Glowing veins, structural lattices, nutrient currents. The display flickered. Then a warning glyph pulsed, bright, undeniable. Root starvation, lattice fatigue, critical fracture probability elevated. The hall erupted. Frills snapped. Tongues clicked. Voices rose in panic and outrage. The Chancellor went still. Seelan's voice remained calm, almost gentle. I told you. Elias turned toward the nobles, letting the chaos crest. You called her ugly, he said, voice carrying. You called her undesirable. You used her as a tool to humiliate me. He looked up at the Chancellor. But the truth is simpler. You tried to silence the one person brave enough to say your city is cracking beneath you. The Chancellor's mouth opened and no sound came out. Elias stepped beside Seelan and lifted their joined hands for all to see. This bond isn't dissolving, he said. Not because of law, because of reality. He gestured toward the diagnostic display, still flashing warnings. You can keep pretending she's the problem, Elias said, or you can let her help you fix it. Seelan's gaze swept across the hall. For the first time, there was something like fire in it, controlled, contained, but unmistakable. I am not your shame, she said. I am your warning. And that, Elias realized, was what truly terrified them, not her face, not her scars, not even her truth. It was the fact that she had survived their cruelty with her spine intact. The Chancellor tried to speak again, but the crowd had shifted. Panic made cowards of prideful people. Suddenly, nobles who had laughed yesterday were whispering to one another about repairs, about preserving their legacies, about listening to expertise. One by one, they began to look at Seelan differently, not with kindness, not yet, but with the reluctant respect reserved for people who might save them. Elias hated that it took fear to make them see her, but he would take the opening. Later in the embassy suite, Seelan stood by the window again. Dawnlight painted the city in soft colors, making even the shimmering towers look fragile. They will want me now, she said quietly, not because they value me, because they need me. Elias walked up beside her. We'll set terms. Seelan's eyes flicked to him. We, Elias nodded. We. Seelan stared out at the city. They called me ugly for years. Elias' voice was steady. Then let them choke on the fact that you were right. Seelan's mouth curved just slightly, not a memory this time, a real smile, small, cautious, but undeniably hers. You already knew, she said almost to herself. Elias looked at her. What? Seelan turned, those two open eyes holding his. In the hall, you did not hesitate because you already knew who I was. Elia's throat tightened. He didn't make a speech. He didn't try to sound poetic. He simply said the truth. I knew, he agreed, and I wanted you safe, Seelan swallowed. No one has wanted that. Elias lifted a hand, brushed his thumb lightly across the back of her scarred knuckles and almost touched a question Seelan didn't pull away. I do, he said. Outside, the city's towers glowed with living light. Inside, Seelan, once no house, once undesirable, once used as a weapon of shame, stood beside a human who refused to see her as anything less than whole. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that survival could become something else. Something like belonging, something like home. They tried to end a war by turning a woman into a joke. They tried to break a human with a gift wrapped in cruelty. But the ugliest alien woman wasn't a punishment. She was the only one telling the truth. And the human didn't choose her out of pity. He chose her because he already knew what the galaxy kept forgetting. Real worth doesn't ask permission to be seen.